Hello, everybody, and welcome back to BioSC 140 Human Physiology. I'm making this video to introduce you to the first JALR assignment. I'm going to walk you through this first assignment to help everyone out. So, first off, I told myself I wasn't going to do a lot of just general stories and lessons. I typically talk a lot about just life in general in class when I lecture live. But I told myself I was going to do less of it this semester. But I'm going to start out with a story because I think it helps you get the goal of what we're trying to do here. So when I was in college, I got accepted into a scholarship program that allowed me to work in a laboratory on campus. And when I got into this laboratory, I was able to work there 20 hours a week, and it was awesome. They paid for my school. I was like 19 years old. I was young. And I was like a second year in college, and there were PhDs in the lab. There were master's students in the lab. There was a postdoc student from Germany who already had his PhD in the lab. There were older classmen in the lab. There were a lot of basically intimidating people in this lab. And this lab met once a week for an hour to talk about a specific primary research paper in that field. And so I got emailed the primary research paper for the first one that I was going to. And when I started reading it, I felt like it was in a foreign language. Like I didn't understand. There were every other word I was having to Google and look up online. I didn't understand concepts. I didn't understand the format. I felt like a kindergartner trying to read like this masterpiece of human genius. Like seriously, I felt like I felt like this paper was like the highest level of intelligence. And I read it like 50 times. I had notes. I had like notes written on a side piece of paper, notes written on the printout that I had. And I studied, I practiced talking about it because I wanted to show up to the meeting, like knowing I wanted to contribute to the meeting. I wanted to be smart and be accepted by this group. And I walk into the meeting with a fresh printout so they wouldn't see my notes and know how hard I worked reading this scientific paper. It was really the first scientific paper I had ever really read. It was like my first one. And Dr. Hedin sits down, he's the head of the lab, sits down, and he goes, all right, I'm going to open the floor up to discuss, this paper our paper of the week. And the German postdoctorate student goes, Dr. Hedin, I can't believe you chose this paper. This paper is such garbage. This paper is awful. This paper is awful because of this, because of this, because of this, because of this, because of this. I can't believe, I'm embarrassed for the journal for publishing this paper. He literally said that. I'm embarrassed that this journal published this poor scientific paper. And I'm just like thinking to myself, wow, like what? This is a masterpiece. Like I struggled so much to read this paper. And I bring it up because that's where we want to get to. We want to get to the point where we're not intimidated by primary research. Primary research, at least when I was first introduced to it, I thought it was all perfect. I thought it was all flawless. I thought it was the epitome of human achievement in the sciences. But a lot of papers have flaws. A lot of papers have limitations. And I want you all to be able to read the papers and be able to find the flaws, find the limitations, and not be intimidated by reading scientific papers. And that's the goal of the JALR assignments. I want you to be comfortable and prepared when you start reading scientific papers. I want you to be able to read them, understand what's going on, and assess them critically. All right, so that's the goal. And these 5 assignments and the laboratory report are designed to do that. The first 5 assignments are kind of like practice, learning, preparing, and then the laboratory report, when you write it up, it'll be like practice writing. You'll write up a laboratory report. Typically, there's 5 sections in a scientific journal, like a scientific paper write-up. We're only going to write up 3 sections. We're not going to do a reference section because your reference is the materials I provided. And we're not going to do a method section because you would just copy what's in the book. So we're going to write in this class for the final write-up, we're going to do an introduction, we're going to do a results, and we're going to do a discussion section. So that's where we're going. That's the goal. That's what we're doing. All right, so let's start moving down. The computer like lags a little bit as I try to move through. Okay, I went too far. There we go. All right, now it's working. All right, so one of the most important aspects of understanding a scientific study is having a clear sense of what the experimenters did to collect the data. That is, what did they do to actually get the data? Did what they do to get the data bias the experiment? I mean, if you read an experiment, it says global warming has been accelerating and all of their temperatures that they're taking are taken from inside volcanoes, you should know that there's something wrong with this, with this experiment. Or conversely, if you read a paper that says global warming's not a thing, and the person's taking their only temperature medicines from within an ice core in the North Pole, you need to know how they got their data, because it can affect what you learn from the paper. That's the key thing. You need to understand how they got their data, because how they got their data can affect what value you derive from the paper. Some the experiments that we do in our class usually have fairly simple steps, methodologies. They have maybe 4 to 10 steps per experiment most of the time, except for probably the Frog Lab has more. When you read scientific papers nowadays, their method section will be like a book. It'll be like 6 pages sometimes. It'll have 64, 122 steps. Breaking the steps down into a more manageable, understandable form can help you understand how they got their data. And this first activity is giving you a tool to help you understand how scientists got their data. And it's called diagramming. So what I want you to do is I want you to take the methods of the experiment and turn it into a visual representation. A visual representation of how they got their data. Now, flowcharts tend to be a little different than diagrams. Diagrams are they're less arrows typically, but it's a visual representation of how you got the data. So a diagram of how to get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is below. It's a visual representation that shows the reader, that shows you how to get the data. Some people, I don't know, I'm not one of them, but some people might be great at reading 124 steps in an experiment and knowing exactly what's going on. Me personally, thinking about it visually, breaking the steps down, and actually looking at it visually can help me understand. That's the goal for this first activity. So you'll do it right here. You'll diagram your first experiment. So I'm going to take a step back. Working through all the JALRs and the laboratory report, it's best if you do lab 2 first, work through lab 2 first, and then choose your favorite experiment from within lab 2. So choose either Fox 8.4a, 8.4b, 8.4c, 1.3a, or 1.3b. Choose one of those 5, your favorite one, the one that's most interesting to you, and run with that experiment for all the JALRs and the laboratory write-up. The JALRs when you finish the JALRs, you're gonna have half the report written already. It's gonna make it really easy if you just use the same experiment the whole time. So that's what I recommend. Moving on, here's some background information. You can read this on your own about the different parts of a scientific paper. You should know the different parts. So I'll be honest, when I want to learn something from a scientific paper, I don't read every word most of the time. Most of the time, I know exactly what information I want to find in that paper, and I go to the section that's appropriate and I find that. Sometimes I read the whole thing, but get familiar with all the different sections. It helps. And right here is kind of some reading comprehension for the previous page. A few things, there's a few questions on here that tend to be a little ambiguous for some students. Do your best. So down here in references, ultimately we're not going to have a reference section. So typically scientific papers have like literally hundreds and hundreds of references. We're not going to have a reference section because your references are all going to be materials that I gave you. Based on the laboratory statement write-up, what 2 references? I mean, if you did include references, it would be the class materials, the Fox book, the supplement, but we're not going to have one of those. And I think that's the one that throws students off the most. All right, moving on, translation. So this is another tool, another mindset, another skill, another way to look at scientific papers and to help you understand what's going on in them. Remember my story about how when I was in that lab and I had my first scientific paper and it looked like a foreign language. It looked like an alien language. Well, translation is the process of taking something from scientist talk, from researcher talk, to general conversation language, And that's what I want you to do with this paper. This introduction is just the introduction from a paper called Physiological Response of Adipocytes to Weight Loss and Maintenance, edited for class use. I want you to translate this section, this introduction for the paper, from scientist or researcher talk to just normal everyday talk. If you were going to explain this introduction to your grandma, unless your grandma's a scientist, your non-scientist grandma, how would you explain it? If you're going to explain this experiment to your 13-year-old cousin who's not a scientist, how would you explain it to them? Putting things in, translating things is a good skill for you to have personally to understand scientific papers. It's also a good skill for you to have to talk about scientific papers with other people. And for many of you, you're going to have patients in front of you. And you need to be able to converse with doctors, other healthcare providers, where you might use doctor talk, you might use scientific talk, and then you're going to have to translate that to the patient in front of you to a way that they understand, to a form that they understand. So this is a good practice for scientist you and for practitioner person with a patient in front of you. All right. For some reason, when I don't move the slide for a little bit, it like gets stuck. So it like takes a moment to start. There it goes. Then it kind of jumps. So that's what you're doing with translation. This next part, we're going to do what's called a concept map. A concept map shows you how concepts are within a paper, within an idea, are related. How are all these concepts related? And to build a concept map, we're going to start with getting what we call seed terms in this paper. Seed terms. So what we're going to do is, scrolling down a little bit, we're going to go back to that same introduction that we just translated. Back to the same introduction that we just translated, and we're going to add more seed terms into this top box right here. Seed terms are big ideas. So far we see adipocytes, nutrient deprivation, protein expression, dysregulation, weight maintenance. I want you to add about 10 more of what you think are the most impactful words in that paper, in that introduction. And once you have your 15 or so seed terms, I want you to draw a concept map. Concept maps have arrows, directional arrows. It could be a two-way arrow. It could be a one-way arrow. But it has arrows that show how the different concepts, the different ideas are linked through arrows. And here's an important part. Each arrow will have a word that describes the relationship. So get all 15 words on your piece of paper, or more words. Draw arrows between the ones that relate to each other, and on each arrow, write how they relate to each other. How they relate to each other. So we have two examples right here. Submission checklist on the bottom. Make sure you get all those parts done. And on the topic of submission, if you go to assignments, you should be able to find JALR 1. You can submit it there. The best way to submit this assignment is to print the paper out, write your responses on that piece of paper, scan it back into your computer, and upload it at the file upload on assignments. Not all of you have scanners, I'm aware. Adobe Scan is a free app that I use on my phone, and it allows you to scan papers with your phone, turns them into a PDF. I know I have the Canvas app on my phone. You can just upload it directly from your phone, or you can send it from your phone to your computer to upload. With that being said, my background today, two cute photos, is Moose on this side and Molly on this side. Those are my babies. I hope that they put you in a good mood throughout this video, because they're super cute and they always put me in a good mood. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. My name is Dan, and good luck on your assignment.